So thank you all, and I have a lovely lady over here to my right. She is the Grassroots and Communication Coordinator for the Americans for Prosperity. That is one of the premier groups that exist to facilitate the conservative cause. They have got all kinds of things that they do to help us do what we do. And I'd like you to give a round of applause to Miss Cindy Mallette.
I am very excited to be in East Texas tonight. This is my hometown. My dad was in the Air Force and retired to Longview, and that's where I went to high school and graduated. And I married a young man from Overton, Texas, and then my first real job out of college was working for the Tyler Morning Telegraph as a local government reporter, and I worked there for about 2 years before coming to work for Americans for Prosperity. So my heart is in East Texas, and I would love to be here as often as possible, so I'm so thankful that Mickey called and asked me to come to speak to you all tonight. Now, Americans for Prosperity, we're a grassroots organization. We have more than 1.5 million members across the United States in all 50 states. And here in Texas, we have 31 state chapters, so I'm from the state chapter here in Texas. There are only 3 of us who work in my office. It's myself, and I do the Grassroots and Communications. And then our state director, Peggy Venable, and you've probably heard of her. She goes around and speaks a lot throughout Texas, and she's an incredible woman. And then we have our legislative liaison, Eliza, and her job is to track all of the bills that are going through our state legislature to find out what the good ones are that we want all of our members to support, and then what the bad ones are that we want them to call or email or fax their legislator and put a stop to it. So the 3 of us work tirelessly throughout the state, but we can't get anything done without our grassroots members. And here we have almost 100,000 members in Texas who are active, who are dedicated, who have signed up to get our weekly newsletter. We send out an email newsletter that talks about all of the key issues here in Texas and some of the key national issues, and we always give you guys a way to make a difference. That's the bottom line. You know, you can have information, but if you're not doing anything with it, what's the good in that? There's nothing. You know, that's how we get things like Mr. Obama as president and liberals like Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid. A lot of good people go and vote, and they might hear and believe some good things, but they're not telling their friends and neighbors. And we need you talking to your friends and neighbors, getting them educated about what these issues are, and then turning them out to the polls. So that's a little bit about what we do as Americans for Prosperity, and I'll tell you about one of our key initiatives we started recently. It's called Lone Star Strong. And, you know, Texas has one of the most vibrant, actually has the most vibrant economy in all of the United States. We're the #1 state economically in the United States. And we think, you know, here in Texas, we hear this good news, and, you know, pretty much the recession has left us alone. We've been able to weather it pretty well, but we take that for granted. And we don't understand how important it is, or maybe why it is that we're in such a good spot. And it's because of conservative leaders like Governor Perry, like Attorney General Greg Abbott, like Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst, like our conservative legislators who have worked hard and listened to their constituents and passed legislation over time that has allowed Texas to be in the #1 position that it is in today. And not only do we want Texans educated and talking to their friends and neighbors about why it is we're in this position, but we also want other state elected officials to look at Texas and say, hey, we want to replicate that in our own state. And we want Congress to look at Texas and say, what is it that Texas is doing right that we should be emulating here in Washington, D.C.? And ultimately, of course, we'd like to get a president who will do the same thing. Instead of punishing Texas, who, like Aaron said, is doing the best as far as our environment goes, our economy goes, instead of punishing for Texas for our success, we want a president who's going to look at Texas as a model and emulate us. So let me give you just a list of ways that Texas is the #1 state. I know we just hate to brag here in Texas, right? That's just the last thing. We're not known for that at all. But, so here's some ammo for you guys. If you do feel like bragging, here are the top 10 reasons Texas is the #1 state, and I'll tell you where you can find it if you want to look it up again later. It's LoneStarStrong.com. LoneStarStrong.com. Go to the website and check it out. So we are the #1 state for job creation. We are also the top state for business. We are the top exporting state in the nation. And we have the most Fortune 500 companies, even more Fortune 500 companies than New York. Can you believe that? That's awesome. Texas has a balanced state budget. Wouldn't we all love Congress to learn from us on that? And I know that there is work out there to pass a constitutional amendment that would require Congress to operate under a balanced budget, like Texas has in our Constitution. We're also the #1 state for lawsuit reform. It's also called tort reform. And as a result of that, many, many doctors are coming to Texas to practice because their insurance rates are lower and they are able to practice more freely, and they don't have to do all these nonsensical tests just to cover their legal behind. You know, they can come to Texas and practice and do a good job, and we have a vibrant healthcare system as a result. In fact, I've got some very good friends from Oklahoma. Forgive them, they were Sooners. My friend's husband went to his residency here in Texas, got his doctorate in Oklahoma, and came to Texas to do his residency, and now he's practicing here in Texas. And while he says, yes, I would love to move to Oklahoma again one day, and I have no idea why, but he says Texas is the place to be for a young doctor coming out of school. They're able to get employed, pay lower insurance rates, and Texas even has this really great program. Well, they'll pay off student loans for doctors who are willing to work in rural areas for a certain amount of time. So Texas is just wonderful, as you can tell. Okay, Texas is also the fastest growing state in the nation. I know here in Trinity, Texas, you may not have had the influx of Californians, but in Austin, Texas, I think every other person is from California or Michigan. There are a lot of Californians and Michigans, and we are working very, very hard to tell them about why they moved here in the first place. Texas is good because we have conservative leadership, and we vote for low taxes and less government regulation. And if you want to stay in Texas and keep Texas good, start voting our way. Forget what you did back in your home state. Texas also has the largest electricity market in the nation. In fact, we operate off of our own grid. And a lot of people, and I'm not going to say they should or shouldn't do this, but have used that as the reason why Texas could potentially, separate from the nation if it came to that. But I'm not going to advocate one way or the other. But let me just say, Texas is doing really well. And a lot of that's due, in fact, in part to the deregulation of our electricity market a few years ago. And some people like to argue against that. But the truth is, in areas where the electricity market is deregulated, customers are paying lower electricity rates. And deregulation simply means you're able to shop around for who you want to provide your electricity, and there's competition, and so the electric companies are competing to get customers and therefore lowering their rates and providing more flexible options for customers. Texas is also the #1 state for transparency at the state level. Our comptroller, Susan Combs, has done a really great job to put a lot of our state records, our state budget, even the stimulus expenditures right online, and anybody can go to her website and look at where all this money is going and how it's being spent. And in Americans for Prosperity, I've used it quite a bit just to see where's that money going, who did the stimulus dollars go to, and how are they spending it, and is this the most ethical way to do it? And so it's thanks to a lot of effort, we've been named the top state for transparency in the United States. Finally, Texas is #1 because we have no state income tax. Yay. Actually, when I talked to these Californians about why they moved to Texas, they said the biggest reason was we don't have a state income tax. So that's a good thing for us, but yes, it does mean we have more neighbors from California. But they need to learn, and they need to learn the Texas way. So I'm going to pass out a couple of handouts here.
Cindy, is it fair to say that most of those people wouldn't be leaving California if it wasn't for the way the situation the state's in?
Sorry, say it again?
I said, is it fair to say that most of our friends that are coming from California wouldn't have even come if the state hadn't been in such?
You're absolutely right. If California had been passing conservative legislation and operating with lower taxes and not having so many goofy programs and bureaucratic spending in place, obviously their state wouldn't be in the condition it's in. And as a result, because people are getting IOUs from the government for their income tax checks, people are coming to Texas in droves. They realize it's just better to live in a state where you have more freedom and more opportunity and a more business-friendly environment. You know, there are problems with it, and I'll acknowledge Texas is not perfect, but what we are on the right track. We've got the right mindset, and the people of Texas are holding their elected officials accountable to that.